women in perimenopause, how do you approach starting HRT?
So I think the first step is to get a urinary cycle map and take a look at what's going on with estradiol and the progesterone and see where the defects are and address those defects.
What if the woman has a Mirena IUD in place? How does that modify your approach?
Makes things complicated, and it's very, very difficult if they've had the Mirena IUD for less than 1 year. After that, we start to get a bit of a return of the progesterone cycle that we can measure, because the urinary tests only measure the progesterone, not the progestin that is in the IUD. So a lot of times we're really going to have to get a little bit of data, and then we're going to need to look at the person's symptoms and map out in their cycles to where they're having the symptoms. Most of the time it's going to be a progesterone defect, and we'll end up supplementing for those days where they're having symptoms, probably due to low progesterone. But it is complicated as compared to somebody who does not have a Mirena.
What labs can be used to show if someone who has had a hysterectomy is in menopause?
Yes, that's a good question, because menopause is defined as not having a menstrual period for 1 year. And at the point that you've lost the ability to have periods, then you just have symptoms of menopause. But are you actually in menopause? We can actually measure this and sort this out fairly simply. Your FSH will consistently be high and lose the pulsatile nature of how it normally is. Your estradiol will become low. Your LH will elevate, but not as consistently as what we find with the FSH. And then the anti-müllerian hormone will go low, and the inhibin B will end up becoming low also. So those are the primary tests, but most of the time just an FSH and estradiol is sufficient.
Can you talk about the use of rapamycin to prolong fertility in women?
Yes, I certainly can. So there was a nice study done at Columbia University, and what they were looking at is whether they could slow down the loss of eggs from women, and thus presumably delay how long it was going to be until they reached menopause. And it's actually fairly significant, even as a longevity issue, because if you end up delaying menopause, we find that women who have late menopause actually live longer and healthier.
What lab tests do you track to see if the rapamycin is working?
The principal one is one called anti-müllerian hormone. And what is interesting with this is that it gets lower if you have less eggs left. So it's a good way to actually measure and see how many eggs somebody has left. And seeing the natural progression of that become much slower is really the way that you're going to track and see if the rapamycin is working.